Learn the 9 signs your prayers are about to be answered. There is a moment, almost imperceptible, when silence becomes heavier than noise. You have prayed, pleaded, and waited, and yet the world seems indifferent. No reply, no sign, only a hollow quietness that lingers inside the heart. But what if I told you that this very silence is not emptiness, but the first whisper of a response? What if the absence of answers is, in fact, the beginning of the answer itself? Think of the seed buried in the soil. You cannot see it, you cannot touch its transformation. Yet beneath the surface it is alive, reorganizing itself, preparing to break through. The silence of God often mirrors this hidden process, where the invisible work takes place before your eyes can perceive it. Modern psychology reveals that in moments of silence, the brain reorganizes pathways, consolidates memories, and creates clarity. Judith Beck would argue that silence teaches us to challenge distorted thoughts and ground ourselves in truth rather than fear. Andrew Huberman shows us that silence regulates dopamine release, resetting our attention, giving us strength to perceive details we once overlooked. And Marcus Aurelius reminds us that the absence of immediate answers does not mean abandonment. It means alignment with something larger than our will. In this silence, the restless mind slowly starts to soften. Anxiety fights for control, asking, "Why nothing? Why now? Why me?" But the silence itself becomes the answer. It teaches patience. It rewires trust. It trains resilience. You start to realize that perhaps the silence is not the delay of heaven, but the preparation of your soul. So when you sense silence pressing heavily on your chest, do not mistake it for divine neglect. Silence may be the very stage where the foundations of your answered prayer are being built. It is in this pause that strength is created, clarity takes form, and faith matures beyond superficial expectation. The silence that speaks louder. There comes a time when the lack of visible answers makes you question if your prayer was even heard. You feel suspended in uncertainty, as though your words have dissolved into the air. Yet this silence is not an absence. It is a presence in disguise. It is like the stillness before dawn, when nothing seems to move, but beneath the surface, the world prepares for light. God's silence often carries more weight than his words, because silence demands you listen with the heart, not the ears. From a psychological view, silence forces the mind to slow down. It interrupts the cycle of anxiety and creates space for reflection. David M. Clark reminds us that anxious thoughts multiply when there is too much noise, but in silence, the brain has the opportunity to restructure, to shift focus, and to allow resilience to take root. Andrew Huberman explains that during stillness, the nervous system recalibrates, and the body moves from states of agitation to calm awareness, giving you a deeper capacity to notice what has always been present. Philosophically, Descartes would say that the silence invites you to doubt what is unstable and seek certainty in what is eternal. Montaigne would see silence as a mirror of the soul, confronting you with truths you may have been running from. The Stoics would remind you that silence itself is a training ground for endurance, for learning to accept the things you cannot control. When your prayers seem unanswered, ask yourself, what if the silence is the answer? What if this pause is shaping you more than the response itself ever could? The silence that speaks louder is not passive. It is an active force that transforms your perception, grows your resilience, and deepens your faith. The absence of sound becomes the proof that something invisible is already at work, the shift in inner perception. There is a moment when the world around you remains exactly the same, yet something inside begins to change. You notice it first in your thoughts. Worries that once seemed overwhelming lose part of their grip, doubts that echoed endlessly begin to quiet down, and a strange clarity starts to surface. This shift in perception is not random. It is a subtle but powerful sign that your prayer is already unfolding. The external circumstances may not have moved yet, but the internal landscape is being reshaped. Cognitive behavioral therapy teaches that transformation often begins in the way we interpret reality rather than in the reality itself. Judith Beck explains that when you start replacing distorted thinking with balanced reasoning, your emotions follow. This is exactly what happens when prayers begin to be answered. The heart learns to interpret silence differently, not as rejection, but as preparation. Neuroplasticity, as Joe Dispenza highlights, proves that the brain is not fixed. It rewires itself according to repeated focus and belief. In other words, your inner alignment is evidence of an outer shift already in motion. From a philosophical angle, Aristotle argued that true power lies in learning to master your own mind before seeking to control the world. Marcus Aurelius echoed this by reminding himself daily that perception is everything, and it is not events themselves that disturb us, but the meaning we assign to them. When your inner lens shifts, it is a clear sign that heaven's hand is gently moving your heart closer to what is coming. So when you begin to feel lighter in spirit, more open to hope and less enslaved to fear, recognize this as one of the most powerful indicators that your prayer is not only heard, but already alive within you. Change begins invisibly, and the first stage of answered prayer is always the change that takes place in you, the invisible weight that begins to lift. You know the feeling of carrying a burden so heavy that even your breath feels trapped beneath it. Worry, fear, and unanswered questions pile onto your chest until hope seems like a distant memory. And then, almost without warning, something shifts. You wake up one morning and realize that the heaviness has lost some of its power. The storm in your thoughts begins to quiet, and peace seeps in from places you cannot explain. This is not coincidence. It is one of the most reliable signs that your prayer is already being answered. Science helps us understand this mysterious release. Andrew Huberman shows that when the nervous system transitions from hyperarousal to calm regulation, the body experiences relief even before external conditions change. It is as though your biology is catching up with a reality that has not yet fully manifested. Psychologists like David M. Clark describe this moment as cognitive relief, when the brain releases the pressure of obsessive worry and opens space for healthier interpretations. In spiritual language, it is the lifting of an invisible weight, the quiet assurance that what you asked for is already unfolding. The Stoics would call this lightness the fruit of acceptance, not resignation, but the deep knowing that life is not against you, it is guiding you. Descartes would frame it as clarity of mind, proof that your reasoning has aligned with truth rather than illusion. And Montaigne would say that once the heart begins to breathe again, it has already stepped into a new reality, even if the world has yet to catch up. If you are sensing that the suffocating weight you once carried is beginning to fade, see this not as a mood swing, but as a divine indicator. Peace that cannot be explained is peace that is given, and this peace always arrives ahead of visible answers, preparing you to receive them with strength. The strange coincidence that is not a coincidence. There comes a point when life begins to arrange itself in ways that logic alone cannot explain. You think of someone and they call you within minutes. You read a random line in a book that echoes exactly what you prayed the night before. A conversation overheard in passing delivers the very words you needed to hear. These are not accidents, they are alignments. They are quiet signals that your prayer has already set unseen forces in motion. Psychology calls this selective attention. Once your mind is attuned to a desire or intention, it begins to notice patterns and connections it once ignored. Andrew Huberman explains how the brain's reticular activating system filters what seems relevant, allowing you to detect opportunities and messages that were always present but previously invisible. Spiritually, these alignments feel different from mere chance. They strike with uncanny precision, awakening a certainty that your words were never lost in the void. Philosophers wrestled with this centuries ago. Aristotle observed that chance events often serve purposes greater than we immediately see. Marcus Aurelius would frame coincidences as part of the larger order of the cosmos, where everything unfolds in harmony, even if our eyes cannot perceive the entire design. Montaigne would remind us that what we call coincidence often mirrors the readiness of our inner life to recognize meaning in the outer world. When the strange and the ordinary intertwine so perfectly that your spirit stirs, pause and take notice. These moments are confirmations that your prayer has echoed beyond you and is now weaving itself back into your reality. It is not randomness, it is reassurance, disguised as coincidence, that your answer is already closer than you think. Doors that close to open the right path. Few things sting as deeply as hearing a no when your heart was begging for a yes. a rejected opportunity, a relationship that collapses, a plan that dissolves. It feels like the heavens are silent or even cruel. Yet often the closed door is the clearest evidence that your prayer has already been heard. What appears as denial is in truth redirection. It is protection from a future you cannot yet see, steering you toward a place where the answer will not only come, but endure. In cognitive behavioral terms, rejection challenges the mind's automatic assumptions. Judith Beck would say that it forces a restructuring. The false belief that everything must go your way collapses, allowing new perspectives to take shape. Andrew Huberman notes that when the brain encounters failure, it adapts by rewiring circuits to increase resilience, sharpening focus, and expanding problem-solving pathways. Spiritually, this closed door is not punishment, but a signal that your request has been rerouted to align with a greater design. Philosophically, Seneca warned that we often suffer more in imagination than in reality, especially when we mourn doors that were never meant to open. Descartes might argue that a closed path is proof that reason must look beyond appearances to find certainty. And Marcus Aurelius reminds us that what stands in the way often becomes the way, shaping us into people prepared for what is ahead. When a door slams shut and leaves you wounded, resist the urge to see it as failure. Instead, recognize the echo of your prayer hidden inside it. The path you envisioned may have ended, but that ending is the beginning of alignment. Sometimes the very no you fear is the yes you need, written in a language your heart will only understand later. Resistance that transforms into strength. There are seasons when every step feels like a battle. Obstacles repeat themselves. Delays stretch longer than expected and setbacks seem endless. At first you interpret this resistance as proof that your prayer has gone unheard. But with time, something unexpected emerges. The very struggles that once crushed you now shape an inner resilience you never imagined possible. Resistance does not prove absence. It proves preparation. It is a refining fire, strengthening you to sustain the answer when it arrives. Neuroscience explains this through the principle of adaptation. Andrew Huberman shows how stress, when approached with deliberate focus and recovery, builds neural pathways that increase endurance and clarity. Psychologically, David M. Clark describes it as exposure to controlled discomfort, training the mind to face fear without collapse. Each obstacle builds a form of emotional muscle, reducing fragility and increasing stability. Spiritually, this transformation is a divine strategy. You are being trained not just to receive the answer, but to carry it with maturity. Philosophers have always understood this paradox. Aristotle believed that virtue is forged in repeated action, not in ease. Marcus Aurelius insisted that hardship is not an interruption of life, but the very material of growth. Montaigne observed that strength is discovered not in victory, but in endurance of trial. Resistance, then, is not a wall, but a mirror, reflecting the emerging strength within you. So when resistance presses heavily against you, see it not as heaven turning its back, but as heaven preparing your shoulders for the weight of the blessing. The more the struggle persists, the clearer the sign becomes. Your prayer is not being ignored, it is being answered by shaping you into someone who cannot be broken by what is to come. The awakening of gratitude before the answer. There comes a surprising moment when gratitude rises in you without an obvious reason. Nothing external has changed, the answer has not yet appeared, and yet your heart begins to whisper thanks. This is not forced optimism, it is a shift of state. Gratitude, when it appears before evidence, is one of the clearest signs that your prayer is already unfolding. It is as if your spirit knows in advance what your eyes cannot yet see. Neuroscience explains that gratitude reshapes the brain's circuitry, enhancing dopamine and serotonin, chemicals linked to joy and motivation. Andrew Huberman highlights how consistent gratitude practice creates a more resilient nervous system, one that faces uncertainty with strength instead of fear. In cognitive behavioral therapy, gratitude interrupts distorted patterns of thought, replacing cycles of worry with cycles of trust. The very act of feeling thankful ahead of time reprograms your mind to expect good, aligning your inner world with what is to come. Philosophically, Aristotle saw gratitude as a foundation of virtue, proof that the soul recognizes the good before it is fully formed. The Stoics understood it as a radical discipline, choosing to bless even the unseen, transforming suffering into strength. Montaigne would say that when gratitude arises without cause, it is the clearest reflection of an inner transformation, a sign that the heart has already received what it asked for. If you find yourself thanking God without clear evidence, pause and recognize the significance. That gratitude is not naive, it is prophetic. It is the echo of a prayer already answered, a confirmation that the unseen reality is drawing near. Gratitude before the answer is the evidence that the answer is already on its way, the clarity that dissolves doubts. There comes a moment when the fog in your mind begins to lift. Questions that once consumed you lose their sharp edges, and decisions that felt impossible suddenly reveal a path that feels unmistakably right. This clarity is not born of chance, but of alignment. When prayers begin to be answered, confusion gives way to direction, and what once seemed tangled becomes strangely simple. Psychology reminds us that clarity often emerges when distorted thinking patterns lose their hold. Judith Beck teaches that by challenging negative assumptions, the mind opens space for more balanced, rational perspectives. Neuroscience shows us that in states of heightened focus, the brain strengthens connections in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and planning. Andrew Huberman explains that this neurological shift allows the mind to see solutions that anxiety previously obscured. Spiritually, this newfound clarity is a sign that your prayer is aligning both your mind and your path. Philosophers framed clarity as the highest good of reason. Descartes sought certainty through methodical doubt, showing that truth often emerges after questioning everything. The Stoics emphasized that inner calm allows perception to sharpen, teaching that peace of mind leads to clear action. Montaigne would say that clarity is the fruit of living close to one's truth, not running from it. When doubts that once paralyzed you begin to lose their power and a new sense of direction rises, take it as a sign. Clarity is not simply mental relief, it is divine confirmation. Your prayer is being answered, and the first evidence is the peace of knowing what to do next, the intuition that guides with firmness. There are moments when reason alone cannot explain why you feel compelled to move in a certain direction. A sudden conviction rises within you, to call someone, to change a plan, to step into or away from a situation. It is not a random impulse, but a steady inner nudge that feels both gentle and unshakable. This intuition, often overlooked, is one of the strongest indicators that your prayer is being answered. It is the voice of alignment between your inner world and the divine response taking shape. From a psychological perspective, intuition is the product of accumulated knowledge and subtle pattern recognition. David M. Clark describes it as the brain's ability to synthesize information beyond conscious awareness, providing insights that feel instantaneous. Neuroscience supports this. Andrew Huberman explains that the brain constantly processes signals below the threshold of awareness, and what emerges as intuition is often the refined output of these hidden processes. Spiritually, however, intuition is more than brain function. It is the whisper of guidance, a compass placed within the heart. Philosophers also recognized its value. Aristotle referred to nous, a kind of intellectual intuition, as the highest form of knowledge that grasps truth directly. The Stoics trusted inner impressions as part of divine order, seeing them as bridges between reason and the will of the cosmos. Montaigne observed that when we dare to follow those inner urgings, life often reveals meaning in retrospect, confirming that intuition is not blind, but deeply attuned. When an inner certainty arises, steady and persistent, take notice. It may not come with explanations, but it does not need to. Intuition is often the invisible thread pulling you toward the very answer you have been waiting for. External voices as confirmation. There are times when the words you most need do not rise from within you, but arrive from outside, spoken through other people, music, or even a sentence stumbled upon in a book or online. These external voices feel too precise to be random. Someone casually mentions a phrase that echoes exactly what you prayed last night. A song plays with lyrics that mirror the hope you had secretly carried. These moments act like echoes of your own prayer, coming back to you clothed in the voices of others. Psychology helps explain part of this phenomenon. The mind is wired to seek coherence, and once a prayer sets your focus, your brain becomes more attuned to signals that align with it. Andrew Huberman describes how the brain's attentional filters amplify what feels personally significant, making words or events stand out with heightened intensity. But the accuracy of these encounters often transcends psychology. Spiritually, they become confirmations, subtle reminders that your prayer was not only heard, but is now reverberating through the world around you. Philosophically, the Stoics would say that the Logos, the rational order of the universe, arranges events to provide guidance if only we pay attention. Montaigne would argue that what strikes us most deeply from the outside often resonates with what is already alive inside us, making it impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Descartes would point to the certainty we feel in these moments as evidence of truth that reason alone cannot manufacture. So when you encounter words that pierce through doubt and strike you with uncanny precision, do not brush them aside. These voices are not interruptions, but confirmations. They are signs that your prayer is returning to you, woven into the very fabric of life itself, speaking through others, so that you cannot ignore the answer that is already on its way. The transformation within the heart. The deepest sign that a prayer is being answered is not always visible in your circumstances, but in the quiet revolution that takes place inside you. Fear begins to lose its grip. Bitterness fades into forgiveness, and impatience softens into trust. The very person who once begged anxiously for change becomes someone steadier, calmer, and more resilient. This inner transformation is not a side effect. It is the answer itself beginning to manifest. Psychology shows us that when thought patterns shift, emotions and behaviors follow. Judith Beck emphasizes that sustainable change occurs when the mind replaces distorted thinking with truth-based reasoning, which naturally alters how we feel and act. Neuroscience supports this. Neuroplasticity ensures that new ways of perceiving and responding create lasting pathways in the brain. Andrew Huberman explains that this rewiring doesn't just change how you think in the moment, it permanently strengthens resilience. Spiritually, this internal renewal is often God's first move, preparing the vessel before pouring out the blessing. Philosophers saw transformation of character as the highest evidence of truth. Aristotle taught that virtue is not a theory, but a habit, shaped daily until it becomes part of your essence. Marcus Aurelius reflected that life's trials exist to mold the soul into harmony with reason and order. Montaigne observed that the heart, once changed, interprets everything differently, proving that true prayer answers the one who prays before it ever changes the world outside. When you notice yourself becoming different, less restless, more trusting, more open to hope, pay close attention. That change is not accidental. It is the fingerprint of the answer beginning within you. The heart that prayed has been reshaped to carry the very response it longed for. The final impact, certainty before evidence. The most powerful sign that a prayer is being answered is when you begin to live with certainty even before the evidence arrives. You no longer cling to desperation, nor do you demand constant reassurance. Instead, you walk with a quiet confidence, as though the unseen has already stepped into the visible. This is not denial of reality. It is alignment with a deeper reality that is unfolding beyond what the eyes can measure. Psychology calls this anticipatory confidence, the state in which the mind and body act as if the outcome were already secured. David M. Clark explains that such certainty restructures fear-based thinking, weakening the power of doubt. Neuroscience confirms that belief reshapes the nervous system. Andrew Huberman shows how expectation activates pathways that prepare the brain and body to receive, almost as if they were rehearsing for what is to come. Spiritually, this certainty is faith at its purest, the bridge between what is hoped for and what is already true in the unseen. Philosophers echo this timeless principle. Descartes sought undeniable truth through reason, yet here truth appears in a different form, the unshakable conviction of the heart. The Stoics would call it living in accordance with nature, trusting that all things are unfolding as they should. Montaigne would see it as the final step of wisdom, peace before proof, serenity before sight. When you can thank God as though the answer has already come. When you can walk as if the door were already open. When you can rest without demanding evidence, then you have reached the clearest sign of all. Your prayer is not only heard, it is already becoming reality. Certainty before evidence is the seal, the final proof that the invisible has already broken into your life.